Have to get me to smile at the beginning of what was a game that doesn't involve a ton of smiling. So the Indiana Pacers fall 126-110 to the Boston Celtics in game 2. Obviously, the big news coming out of this that's looming large is that Tyrese Haliburton leaves midway through the third quarter, doesn't return, doesn't play in the fourth quarter, which was being deemed as hamstring and chest injuries that he suffered during the game. We don't know the extent of those, and I'm not going to speculate about the extent of those during this podcast. What we do know is that the Pacers went roughly an 8-minute stretch at the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter, where they did not score and were stuck on 27 points. They got outscored in points in the paint, 54-34, by a Boston Celtic team, which went heavily to small ball lineups. And I think that I would kind of look at this podcast twofold. I thought of two titles for calling it. Oshae, then, or the Pacers played tall rather than playing big. We're going to have to get into all of this, Samson, but do you see any silver lining that we can lead with to give people a ray of hope from this particular basketball game?
A ray of hope for the future, or a ray of hope for the future of this series?
Either one.
Andrew Nembhard looks like a guard who can play starting minutes on like a finals level team. It depends on where... It depends on how good the team is around him, but like he can fit in because of his defense. And what is he, like 64% true shooting over the course of the playoffs? The injury he had, the kidney stones of yesteryear, are gone. They're no longer around, and he's shooting the ball. He has a lot of pop on his drives. That's been really fun to see. Pascal, obviously, this whole playoff run helps determine how Pacers fans view him, how Pacers fans feel about a looming contract. Like, that kind of stuff went good. And Aaron Nesmith is still, we talked about him quite a bit at the end of last podcast. I thought Aaron Nesmith was good. He's obviously super important to what Indiana does. And, you know, if Tyrese does come back healthy, there's still a way forward here for this series. But this was a tough one. It's why I tweeted before the game, I'd be supremely impressed if this game was close or if the Pacers took it. And Pascal kind of like strong-armed them into that position after they didn't really let him touch the ball and allowed a 20-0 run. And then once they got back, they went away from him again. And the decision-making was pretty crazy, but I don't know. There's good things happening. You're in the Eastern Conference Finals. We're supposed to be here type stuff.
Maybe a good place to start in that regard then is with what some of the changes were from the Boston Celtics against all three point guards for the Pacers. That way, whether Tyrese plays or doesn't play, it's still relevant to look at how he was guarded and to show what you were just mentioning with some of what Andrew Nembhard was doing and also just what some changes were against TJ McConnell. So I think a good flashpoint of this is this baseline out of bounds play. The Pacers will run this a lot if the initial option gets denied, then they eventually or effectively just go into Chicago action where Tyrese is going to get that handoff at the top of the key. What you see right away is because Al Horford started this game doing what he did in the second half of the last game and was guarding Pascal Siakam, the Celtics are switching everything else. So obviously Jason Tatum's jumping out to the ball there against Tyrese. Tyrese gets off the ball and gets it back to go at Tatum and get that little ghost screen from Pascal, now another secondary screen. And then another big change was the Celtics did mix in some nexting in this game, particularly off of Andrew Nembhard. So you're seeing Drew Holiday come to Tyrese. Tyrese recognizes that and flips it out to Andrew. This is a fairly open shot that Andrew just happens to miss. But in terms of the coverage against Tyrese, those were the main changes. Because of the cross match, they're switching a lot more ball screens. Obviously, that marginalizes Miles Turner to a degree. And then some of the nexting was there that wasn't as prevalent in the first game. Also, the Celtics, as I mentioned, didn't play Al Horford as many minutes. Luke Cornett injured his wrist, so they weren't playing him as much. So they played 18 minutes without either center on the floor, which means old friend Oshae Brissett was playing quite a bit at nominal 5, which is something that Pacer fans are somewhat familiar with. There were times before Oshae went to Boston where, especially when Sabonis was still on the roster, they would play Oshae on 5 so that the Pacers could switch ball screens, and he would do a lot of fronting of the posts. So that kind of, especially in the minutes with TJ and Tyrese on the floor together and when the bench was on the floor, that kind of impacted and threw a wrench in some things just because at that point, then they were switching everything. Another change, which this was actually a pretty cool little play.
I like that a lot.
That I don't think I've
say something quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Tyrese passing out of that layup, I hate that. I hate
that
so
in the
much.
game, I think that the hammy thing had already happened. because it was at the 4-minute mark of the third quarter.
Mm.
But I can't speak to that specifically.
There had been a few. It's like it's a tendency of his that, and like apologies to Tyrese if I'm going too hard because of an injury, but I think this is something I've noticed over time. It bothers me a little bit. It's like, damn, like you gotta get the ball up tall instead of big, as it were. But I could be going a little bit too hard with an injury thing here. So
no, I mean, going clear back all the way to, I mean, you read the piece that I wrote when I wrote and cataloged all of his jump passes. Something that is noticeable about Tyrese is that a lot of times with his drives, he doesn't go all the way to force the defense to commit before he makes a pass. Now, he's good enough with the jumping and getting tertiary defenders to commit to passing lanes that he finds working ways around that. And also in that piece, I pointed out that there was a lot of times where he would get to the rim and he would pass out of layups. Again, he's very good at manipulating the weak side help when he's under the basket, but there are times where the right read is for Tyrese to make the read for himself, and he doesn't always make that read. But another change that happened before Luke Kornet got injured, which we had talked about during the preview series, is that they were throwing Luke Kornet onto TJ McConnell in these lineups because Luke Kornet had gotten beat so often in drop coverage in the first half of the last game. They decided we'll just put him on TJ, which is something they did during the regular season as well. TJ as the roll man against Luke Kornet and popping into the short roll for it too.
And then into that get action too.
Yeah, we're going to see that one too. So yeah, running pick and roll again with TJ McConnell as the roll man. And then, as you said, a get DHO for Tyrese. So those were two little nifty wrinkles that they found.
I felt like my brain was expanding when I was watching that basketball. I was like, whoa, I couldn't very cool to watch that happen. Really good reads, quick, decisive from those two. That was, I enjoyed that. It's
very sad that there's so many dark clouds over this game because, as you know, I kind of predicted, both teams are going to do enough weird things that some cool things were going to sprout out of the weirdness. But when TJ wasn't on ball, obviously Luke Kornet not being very attentive against him, which meant TJ had to spend a lot of time on ball in these lineups, and they still weren't really getting to the best options all the time, except for when TJ was rolling into the short roll. So those were the two changes against Tyrese and TJ. And then to credit Andrew Nembhard, when he was on ball and they were switching these screens, he, more than most of the other players on the roster, was really aggressive and willing to test Jason Tatum on those switches, which on the night, I didn't really think that Tatum had the best defensive game. He was very straight up and down and not ready to guard at the point of the screens a lot of the time. But the Pacers, it's like as soon as he switched onto the ball, it was like, get off the ball and move it. Andrew was willing to go, and that's a good seal screen from Isaiah Jackson. That was one of the better moments from him.
He's also, Andrew is probably one of the top-end young driving guards in the NBA. I know he doesn't have the volume that a lot of other young guards do, but as far as, the burst, finishing off two, finishing with both hands, through contact, having multiple speeds, very strong.
So then we did see another example this even late in the fourth quarter where he ended up getting switched onto, or Jason Tatum ended up switching out again. He gets off the ball and then gets back to re-attack Jason Tatum, which I thought they probably could have been more active to because I really didn't think that Jason hung in some of the situations where they actually tested it. But to your point, the very first possession of the game, it seemed like the Pacers were in a good place because anytime Andrew Nembhard steals the initial tip, they usually get a frisky possession out of that. And they did because the first opening set was a handoff with Andrew Nembhard using the inside hand thing that I had mentioned on the preview pod, using the left to push across to the right and then get downhill to make the pass to Pascal. But if those changes end up being made, we do know from the 5 games that the Pacers played this season, the first one when they got wrecked by 50 points, Tyrese Haliburton wasn't available. Obviously, massive shift in which team won the 3-point battle. Then there was another game this year where Tyrese got hurt at the beginning of a game and they had to finish it out with TJ and Andrew, and they ultimately ended up winning that game. But Benedict Mathurin played a really big role in why that was able to happen. So they do have experience playing the Celtics this year without Tyrese. Don't know if they're going to have to play him without Tyrese, but those were the major changes. So what did you observe from any of those things or things that maybe they could pull from if they do, in fact, have to not play with Tyrese?
Well, the thing is, the Celtics, they can throw a lot of good stuff up front. It starts to become about, what are they giving up at the back end?
Yeah.
And that's how they defend. And we know we've watched a decent amount of good Miles process. You especially over the last however long, year and a half, I think you've told me, where there's been some really good stuff last game and a couple games throughout this playoff series. It's been abhorrent. And if the Celtics are going to go small, we saw Pascal wiggle, squirm, and swivel to a million different places against a myriad of defenders.
Mm-hmm.
Miles doesn't even have to do that, but going to a fadeaway against a guy who's like 5 inches shorter than you, letting the ball get low so you get stripped on digs and all that kind of stuff. It's like, just be more crisp. You have the talent clearly to score against these mismatches. The Pacers, who are going through droughts, need to be able to look to early work or duck-ins, pop the ball in, move the chains. You have to be able to do that. Miles Turner is a good player. He's well paid. He's well regarded. You're in the Eastern Conference Finals. Shot making needs to be there. That's just what it has to be. The other front court member, Pascal, he has like over 50 points with no free throws. It's just shot making. And that's been tenable. Miles, last game, not so much. You really have to rely on, I think, Ben Shepherd can't go for 3 from downtown in game 3 if Tyrese isn't there. Obi Toppin probably has to pop off. You have to play fast. You have to be able to work from that. Aaron Nesmith has to shoot the ball better. Like, you have to hope that the 3-point shot carries you through a lot of places, and you have to be able to hope that Pascal and Miles still kind of attack and destroy their cross matches, because even if Tyrese isn't there, those cross matches still will be there. So that's the most viable path forward to me, and everybody needs to be better, but especially Miles. And I don't want to be too hard on him, but it wasn't a good game last night.
And it was a stark contrast, too, because when Pascal scored the final 10 points leading into halftime to put the Pacers within 6, Miles wasn't on the floor because he had picked up his 3rd foul. They closed it out with Obi and Pascal. Pascal scoring over the top of Drew Holiday, scoring over the top of Jaylen Brown, scoring over the top of Jason Tatum, really testing his size advantage against those guys, whether that was from mid-range or trying to get closer to the basket and establishing position, as you said. With Miles, I'm not expecting him to be posting up Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I'm really not. We already saw what that looked like in the second half of game 1. He went from scoring 18 points in the first half to going 2 of 5 in the second half. But as you say, if you have Derek White on you in the second half, that can't turn into a one-legged fader. And also, even if it's not from the scoring aspect, you have to make an impact in some other area of the game. As I mentioned, when the Celtics were playing without Luke Cornett or Al Horford on the floor, they outscored the Pacers by 15 points per 100 possessions in 18 minutes. They went 12 of 15 from the field. And the Pacers threw a time there in the second half. The Celtics go really small, and Oshae's out there, and Miles is guarding Oshae, and he's actually guarding Oshae. It's like, if they're going to go that small, the Pacers have to be able to have rim protection in the paint. They got wrecked in the paint, 54-34. He should have been having 1 foot in the paint at all times off of Oshae, and what you get from Oshae is what you get, similar to what they had to do against Precious Achiuwa and Josh Hart in the prior series. And you would think that they probably would have been a little bit more cognizant of that because Oshae played for them for I don't know how many years off the top of my head. Can't even think of the number. But instead, they called a timeout, and they ended up like, let's go even bigger. So they played Miles Turner and Obi Toppin and Pascal Siakam all at the same time, and they lose those minutes. And during them, that's why I said the theme of this really could be they played tall, not big, because I can throw up a compilation of some of these moments that I'm referring to. And like here, right at the top, Miles has Oshae guarding him. And I can tell you from years of watching Oshae with the Pacers, there are things that he does do well defensively. He hangs out in tall grass along the baseline as the low man. He can make good off-ball rotations. He was okay fronting the post for the Pacers and switching out to the ball at times. His post defense typically is not it. He doesn't have a ton of core strength. You should be able to do something more than fading back to the free throw line circle when O'Shea is guarding you and he's not fronting you. Similar thing here where he gets that mismatch against Derek White. Andrew shoots it. Just because Andrew puts the ball up, that should be a prime opportunity for the Pacers to get an offensive rebound. Instead, Miles just releases from it. The ball literally bounces in the spot where he was just standing. Likewise, here's another one, the one that you mentioned where he ends up, probably the ball needed to get there a little bit quicker than it ultimately does, but the ball gets brought down low. Al Horford comes over, and now you're losing that advantage on the inside, which if the Celtics are going to be switching more on the perimeter and it's going to be harder for them to be getting as much action going downhill from some of their guards, especially with what I just showed with some of the next rotations being blended in as well. Like, it can't be this stuff on the interior. Again, there he has Oshae, and he allows Oshae to get back in front. There's no high-low cut from Obi to help enter that into Miles. And now you're just having to go against Jason Tatum until ultimately it ends up being a steal. These minutes were pretty rough when they went to Ben Shepherd and TJ with the three bigs all at once. Likewise here. Like, if you're looking at what all these matchups are, it's a little bit hard for me to understand why can't Pascal be doing something with the ball in his hands and you're screening with TJ with Peyton Pritchard guarding him. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it seems like it takes the Pacers too long to find out where the advantage matchups are. I don't really know why Obi relocates to that corner on the pick and roll. And now, like, of all the matchups you could get, Samson, isn't this the last one you would pick? And Obi ISO at the elbow against Jason Tatum?
Yeah, nuts.
I think that's probably the last option you would want with these five people on the floor.
I think that was the play that elicited my jackassery tweet. I was like,
because it doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know how you're not thinking through that a little bit better than that. And likewise here, like, if these are going to be the five people on the floor and you're playing against this small Celtics lineup, at what point in any of those possessions did you be like, oh, they really leveraged their size there? And likewise here, if you're playing Toppin, you're playing Pascal, you're playing Miles, and Ben Shepherd is the person that has to guard Jason Tatum. To me, that's a pretty big indictment, especially because there was several possessions here where Tatum just ends up walking Ben Shepherd into his spot and then just shooting right over the top of him.
Mm-hmm.
You're playing big for what? At that point, just play a small lineup and hope you can match fire with fire.
Yeah. And there's a couple things, like Miles is very vocal about his post position. You know, you can hear him on the court quite often, and like you see it and you hear it. And if you're going to be that type of guy, you have to be able to punish the mismatches you so crave. And also, for the Pacers to ignore some of those inherent advantages, I understand scheme. I understand they want their systematic advantages given, and they want to take those as well. And the proof is in the pudding. They score the ball extremely well. You look up and down the roster, anybody who doesn't have a creation load is like in the mid 60s of true shooting or low, 60s of true shooting. They create good looks, but in this game, when you're not creating them, you have to have that knuckleball. And Pascal Siakam, you talked about, I think it's 153 games over 3 seasons you saw of Oshae Brissett. Probably Pascal Siakam has 200 games of being just like, I get the ball every game. I try and hunt out a guy who looks like Peyton Pritchard or who has the frame of Peyton Pritchard. I did that for 3 seasons with the Raptors, and I was one of the better isolation players in the NBA. If you can't go to that quickly in an Eastern Conference Finals game, especially when he has it cooking, it doesn't make much sense to me. Like, you have to be able to identify that stuff and go to it quickly, as you said. So, yeah, disappointing.
And like I said, even if Miles wasn't going to do something against some of those wings, you can't finish with more turnovers than rebounds.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, feckless basketball.
Some might refer to it as that. Some being on this podcast.
Next shirt, feckless.
I don't know if that would be a top seller. I'm thinking probably not. I also just want to throw this up here because I've titled these what the heck is actually going on. So another example of you have all this size and length on the ball, but what is it really being used for? So I ask you again, Samson, after seeing 2 games of this, what do you think of full court pressure with Pascal, Miles, and Obi?
So you convinced me on the podcast. I deferred to you. I was like, okay, if you're telling me this, I believe you. I believe you.
Like, I understand why they're doing so much full court pressure. I just don't understand why it has to be executed. Just because Miles and Obi are guarding Drew Holiday, why do they have to be the people pressuring the ball? Like, and if it is going to be that, then just pull them back. Because I will say that, like, they've been pressuring the ball fairly aggressively since after the All-Star break. The difference being is it would just automatically be Andrew Nembhard. Like, even if it was Tyrese's defender bringing the ball up, they would just say, Andrew Nembhard is our pressure guy. That is the full court pest. And then they would drop everybody else back. If you don't want to do that because you don't want to cross match, I just don't see what advantage you're gaining from this. And also, like, I know that Miles was playing with 2 fouls and didn't want to pick up his third, but, like, Again, that looks like you're attempting to bait Drew to drive and hoping that you're going to be able to catch up with a recovery block. And there's just too many times where he's not catching up with recovery blocks anymore.
That was game 7. Against the Knicks. It was like Miles was there on time, on target. Not the case right now.
Because here's Obi against Peyton Pritchard during those minutes with that same lineup. And it's just like,
this is so odd. It's just odd.
And there's Miles guarding Oshae Brissett. And like I said, if he's going to be guarding Oshae Brissett in these lineups, he can't be guarding Oshae Brissett. Not while you're applying full court pressure with Obi Toppin. It's a no-pass layup the full length of the floor. And then there's just all these ones where in semi-transition, like just easy cuts. Just like no attention to detail on any of this. Like it's like they're like, we have to apply maximum pressure on the ball. And once they've done that, then they relax and they think that the job is done. And then the back cuts are happening. And
this was the craziest. What
is this when you were ready to be done with the game? It wasn't too long after that the Pacers seemed that they were ready to be done with the game.
Silly. And they're down 11 at that point in the Eastern Conference Finals. Mm-hmm. Get in there. Hustle. Attention to detail.
Just no idea who they're matched up with at all. Like, I don't know.
Just walked to the corner. Nobody picked him up. Oh, Lord.
Well, on the other side of the ball, if Tyrese doesn't play, I think it is possible that the defense gets better.
Yes. Oh, I don't think possible, like a certainty.
I will also counter and say that I think some of the things that were going wrong with the hunting were getting pinned onto Tyrese that weren't really Tyrese's fault, but Jaylen Brown obviously goes off for over 40. What did you think of Jaylen Brown, and what did you think of who was guarding Jaylen and what the coverage against Jaylen was?
So not only was the shot making really impressive, and like I think it was on Obi where maybe it wasn't Obi, but it was that, Darius Garland has the like gather snatch back. Some guys snatch back with a live dribble, but some guys they plant their feet and they gather with 2, bring it back. Jaylen Brown is another guy who does that. He had the one above the break 3 he hit. He had a couple pulls in the middle of the lane that were just like really impressive. He had a couple bully drives that were really good. He shook loose on back cuts a couple times. Like he did it in a myriad of ways on some easy shooting and on some very difficult shooting. This is why the Celtics are lauded as like a tremendous team. This is why they hang around the upper echelon repeatedly, is because Drew Holiday got them a late game post-up bucket. Because Drew Holiday, when they left him alone, cashed a 3. Because Drew Holiday gave them 26 points in game 1, I think. And Derek White has blown up in past games. I'm not sure the Pacers, this is why they have to score the ball. As much as you can try and change and tinker with how you guard Jaylen Brown, I reckon you'll just start leaking holes elsewhere. They don't have the flex tape guy to, flex tape and smack it on the water. I saw this boat in half type of, like, they don't have the problem solving available. I think they'll leak holes no matter what. I just wonder if maybe, like, you say, Jaylen Brown won't score 40 again. Maybe he's just scoring like 28. I'm not sure. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I think going back to game 1, I think what you just said is pretty prescient, because even when they did put Pascal onto Tatum in the fourth quarter, then it just became Drew Holiday time. It's like, okay, Tatum, you go chill for a little bit. Now Drew's just going to bully Ben Shepherd. He's going to bully TJ. He's going to bully Tyrese. They always have another avenue that they can go to, another advantage they can find. That being said, it was like what happened in the overtime. Aaron had fouled out. Andrew's guarding Jason Tatum. You're kind of making it easier on Jason Tatum, and you had to know he was going to go into the post in those matchups where at least maybe if Pascal was guarding him, maybe some more of those possessions turn into self-created threes or some of the one-legged pull-up twos. Like, to be quite honest, some of Jason Tatum's shot selection in the first half of this game was absolutely wild to me.
His decision-making is so funny.
It can really waver from possession to possession. I don't know. But that being said, this is why I thought since the preview, Jaylen Brown is the more agile of the two players. Pascal is going to be better guarding someone who isn't the more agile of the two players. And yet for the second straight game, Pascal is the primary assignment on Jaylen Brown, and Aaron's guarding Jason Tatum. And I'm just very surprised that they haven't flipped that matchup yet.
I bet we see it in game 3. But do you think...
And that's not the only reason that the scoring was happening. We'll look at some of the film, but yeah.
This goes back to your point that we had talked about twice now, where it's kind of like, well, Jaylen Brown is also a high-volume wing. It's not like Pascal's getting a break by going to Jaylen Brown instead of Jason Tatum. Maybe we're talking about degrees of separation here. Like, if it is, maybe I'm trying to step into the shoes of the coaching staff. They think they have to be able to have Pascal scoring, and guarding Tatum will be something that affects the whole court. I don't know, but I do think that Tatum is a cleaner matchup for Pascal. And I think that and I think that Neesmith is a cleaner matchup for Brown. But I'm a schmuck in a chair in Canada. These teams are in Boston and Indiana. I'm not sure.
Can I allow you to, or can you allow me to show you some clips from 2 years ago that don't involve the Indiana Pacers? It's in tweet form, so hopefully you can see it. I put this together as a lifelong Golden State Warriors fan during the NBA Finals 2 years ago to point out how often they were doing everything to force Jaylen Brown to his left hand. So you can see Draymond just sitting on his right. Pretty much everything that the Warriors did in that series was to try to force Jaylen Brown to do something off the dribble with his left, whether that was weak to switch, whether that was shading him to early help, whether it was closing out very hard to his right hand, even if that meant surrendering a middle drive. Like, if you just watch Draymond right there, like, he's already opening his hips intentionally, because the stats back then showed, if you look at my tweet there, he would very rarely get to the rim, whether spotting up or in isolation situations when he was driving to his left. And that's what the Warriors were banking on. 2 years later, Jaylen Brown has improved in certain areas, certainly with some of his handling. That being said, this is why I think that there was so many confusions going on with the Jaylen Brown coverage. That's what Pascal does here. He's clearly trying to weak this screen. And Jaylen still gets around over the top of it, which, like, I don't know how you're allowing somebody to use
moving screen, whistle on the play.
when you're weaking it. But the point being is, look at where Tyrese is. Let me back up and rephrase what I'm about ready to say. Samson, if you're the on-ball defender and you're weaking a screen, what is the screener defender doing?
Not hanging out on the same side like that. Like,
well, what type of coverage should the screener defender be playing?
What type of verbiage are you looking for?
Are you playing drop? Are you playing blitz? Are you hedging? What are you doing if the on-ball defender is playing weak?
So I probably want to be playing in a hard drop.
That's the only thing you can do. If the screener isn't weak and you're preventing them from using the screen and it's virtually going to be like a reject, the screener defender has to be there to plug the gap. And yet, like, it seems like a lot of the time on these coverages that the two players are executing or have different agendas. They're executing two different coverages at the same time. So that makes me question, like, right here, again, you're going to see it. See how Pascal's already opening his hips to force Jaylen Brown to his left, just like what we saw with Draymond Green as the screener approaches. First of all, you're doing that a little too early. Like, if he's going to do that, he needs to wait until Tyrese is in position with the screener. But he's weakening it, and Tyrese is jumping up like he's getting ready to hedge it. So I would really like to know, which coverage was this supposed to be? Weak or hedge?
I bet it's weak.
I think it's supposed to be... Well, you go ahead, and then I'll explain what I think it was.
I think a lot of times teams steal, and I would have to... And how Brown has been defended is, like, greatly affected by his finals performance. And once teams know you struggle at something, they make you prove it until, like, it's actually something you're very good at. And I struggle to believe they'd be running hedge here. It seems easier to believe that they'd be weaking it, because weak is it's just a really popular thing to throw at a lot of players who succeed. And we've seen it a lot with Tyrese. We've seen it a lot with Jaylen Brown. I've seen Tyrese miscommunicate or enact the wrong scheme enough times that I'd probably lean, given the history of how you want to guard Jaylen Brown and given some of the flubs I've seen Tyrese make. I think this is probably lack of attention to detail. And Tyrese is a guy who has to step up in a lot of screens, and this could be just mixed coverage from like Jason versus Jaylen, but I'd probably lean on it being weak, and the bottom is just not there.
Here's all of my thoughts on it. Number one, there's 9 seconds on the shot clock here. Drew's approaching as the screener. Aaron should be pre-switching that and going up with Drew, and he doesn't go. So Tyrese is the screener defender. I do think that Pascal opens his hips too quickly if this was intended to be weak. I do agree with you, though, that it's clearly intended to be weak because he's shifting there. I do not think that Pascal is just merely getting blown by off the dribble here. He's shifting his on-ball positioning because they want to force Jaylen Brown to his left. It's the screener defender's job, if this was supposed to be a different coverage, to be yelling out the different coverage. That's where the communication comes from. So where I think the confusion might be is maybe the instruction going into this game was if it's a 4-5 pick and roll, so let's pretend that Miles is out there and Al Horford's the screener. They were going to play weak coverage and have Pascal forcing him to the left, like what I had shown you in the preview, that they were even doing that against Tatum during the regular season. Tyrese's coverage as the screener defender is almost always a quick show because they don't want to give up the mismatch. So it seems as though Tyrese is assuming everybody knows that when I'm the screener defender, we're going to use a quick show and stay. And Pascal's thinking we're supposed to be weakening Jaylen Brown, and that's what I'm doing as the on-ball defender. And the end point of all of this is there clearly is no communication going on between the two of them for Tyrese to be telling Pascal, hey, I am the screener defender. This is what the coverage is, because he's already shifting his hips before the screener even gets up there. It's clearly two different agendas. And I just want to point out that this isn't just Pascal getting beat off the dribble. This is a mixed communication on a screen. So, because I think that there was a lot of impressions after the game that Pascal's defense was just really abysmal. And I'm not going to say that this is good, but I don't think that that's really on Pascal. I think that it's up to the communication from the screener defender to be calling out the coverage. Because here again, like in this case, you can see that Tyrese is stepping up. He's going to hedge it. If that's going to be the case, then Pascal has to force Jaylen over the top of that screen. Instead, it ends up being a rejection with Tyrese having to get back. And now it's 2 on ball and Derek White's getting open. Like there's just so many like basic screen miscommunication errors there. They forced him intentionally to his left and he pulled up to his shot. That one with Obi, it was the same thing with Obi and Pascal. Like, here's Peyton Pritchard setting the inverted screen over to the right. Obi has to force Jason Tatum to use that screen. And granted, it's a late pivot from Peyton Pritchard. More guards are being able to change angles on screens. But once Tyrese is up above the level, then there's just no protection here. There's nobody stepping up to do anything. And again, Miles, if he's guarding Oshae Brissett, can't be guarding Oshae Brissett. He has to be the rim protector. And then Tyrese is trying to hedge again, and Obi ends up with 2 on ball. Like so many times where it just seems like they're executing 2 different coverages at the same time.
Attention to detail, care, feck. It's got to be there. Yeah.
So, I mean, if that's Andrew in the next game defending there, I don't know that they're necessarily going to be hunting Andrew to that degree to try to force him to be into action. But you could be using him to intentionally weak. Then the big's going to be the screener defender more often. Like those arrangements aren't going to be the same. So, not that you ever want to be playing games without your star player, your franchise player, and Tyrese clearly does a lot for the Pacers, but that particular aspect likely would get better if he wasn't playing.
It's the case with a lot of stars, and stars work hard. They take like Luka, for example, becoming passable for long stretches. This has been like a 2-3 year process for him. Yeah. And they're reaping the rewards, the benefits of it. A lot of stars have to work really hard to find their utility, and they have to be hyper specific on the details because stars are always trying to like maximize their rest time on defense. They're always trying to maximize or to try to hide their limitations. It takes a long time for you to figure that out yourself and also to figure that out at a team wide, like within the scheme. Tyrese will have time, especially with size. Right now, though, yeah, it's a huge hole in the defense that I don't know how they scheme around. I don't know how they get around. But this team was supposed to outscore Boston if they win. So the calculus is very different without Tyrese.
I think it starts with even if you aren't, the stoutest defender, if you actually execute the same coverages at the same time, you at least give yourselves a better chance. Like,
you're very funny.
Otherwise, it's just competing agendas. Maybe it ends up being somewhat like the Bucks series. When Dame didn't play, Milwaukee's defense did get better. They were not a better team without Damian Lillard. And certainly when Damian Lillard was healthy, even when he came back, he wasn't 100% at the end of that series, but that is an effect. What else did you notice about this game? Give me some talking points. Let's reverse this. You let me react to things that you notice and see.
Well, I kind of gave it to you off the top, and we talked about what I liked. Like, we haven't gone really deep on Pascal. We talked about Nembhard and gave him his flowers. I think last game, after game one, we had to wade through all the bad, and then we talked about all the good that happened. There wasn't as much good stuff in this game, just like flat out.
No.
They really struggled. I think the Celtics did, like, unless we would just want to congratulate the Celtics on more stuff, because the Celtics did a really good job of keeping, if not above the break, keeping a lot of stuff above the free throw line. Nembhard was the only guy who got there consistently. Pascal would get to spots, and even he was still taking those, 8 to 14-foot jumpers. Still hasn't taken a free throw in the series. Like, the Celtics are so good right now and just buffer, keeping everything protected. And the Pacers, you have to challenge the buffer a little bit more often. And that's why I know I come across as like quite a fan of Nembhard's game. I am. He challenges the buffer. Nesmith on occasion challenges the buffer. There has to be more of that. And they have to be a little bit more intentional with how they work their actions above the break. And the age-old adage of, like, if you get a screen, the first option is for you to score, not next action, not moving. Like, yes, moving the ball on quickly is good. It's a good tenet to have in the offense. But, like, if you get over the top of a screen, start heading downhill. See what happens. See if you can drag a guy from one place to another. See if the guy, like, navigating maybe a 2-on-1 situation between you and the big, maybe it's a 2-on-2, but see if that pressure coming downhill creates a mistake. We see the Pacers. We just went through a bunch of film where that pressure and that threat to drive, like, sure, some jump shots went down, but it's the threat of those guys getting downhill. That's what creates confusion. That's what creates problems. There's not enough pressure being applied from the Pacers, and I guess we'll see. But I don't know. Credit the Celtics. That's maybe the biggest pet peeve of mine is, like, and you shouldn't pay attention to discourse, by the way, for anybody who wants. But
unless it's ours, please pay attention to ours.
Unless it's ours. But it seems like everybody's only interested in discussing the Celtics as, like, the Celtics only ever, watch other teams lose games, and the Pacers only ever, like, win through. They're just, neither team is ever good. Every team is bad and embarrassing. Nobody's good. Jaylen Brown hitting an incredible, like, that will be in his career highlight mix forever, that shot. And everyone's like, ha, 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 idiot basketball. And it's like, you just watched a supreme athlete, like, tight gather, get up over the top, hit a tying shot. It's like, wow, that's basketball.
You know what's funny about that is there's such a contrast immediately following it, and that was still the takeaway. Like, it is really hard to run ATOs to get players shots and for you to make an incredible shot. And yes, I realize that Pascal was late getting over there and that TJ should have switched it and that there wasn't necessarily an actual contest with a hand up. But the Pacers didn't even get a shot. Like, they got Tyrese off balance, chucking something up out of bounds. And it was still, let's blame the loser instead of celebrating the winner. Like, that was still the reaction to it.
I hate that. I hate that people complain, are like, well, people are injured, so it doesn't count. It's like, of course it counts. If it doesn't count now, what did the players get injured for? What are we playing for? Why do we always have to undermine everything? Celtics played a great game. Credit to them. Hope the Pacers are better in game 3. I don't know.
I mean, I guess I will have a call back to the prior episode, because the one clip that I did share of our positivity in which we were talking about that the Pacers kept finding the loose thread that was Al Horford and pulling on it and being able to navigate through that. And you had kind of mentioned that, like, I don't know how Kristaps Porzingis necessarily remedies that. And I'm like, likely not, but they're going to be even more focused on wanting to keep him on the floor because of the offensive versatility that he brings. They clearly didn't have as much incentive to do that with the two centers that are currently available for them, in that they played very small. So I guess my question would be to you, if you were the Pacers going into game 3, whether Tyrese plays or he doesn't play, would you be more quick to try to play smaller, like what we saw at the end of halftime with what Pascal was doing against some of those smaller matchups when it was Obi and Pascal? Or would you be like, no, we need to play big and actually play big within that and try to punish them for playing small? Like, what is the approach there? Because they didn't achieve either outcome, with exception of that small flurried stretch where they really leaned into Pascal.
I think they can win both ways. You just have to play better within it. Like, as we talked about Miles, he has to play with more force. And also there's different things you can do to create open looks. And they have to be more mindful of getting Pascal the ball. Of course, Pascal, there might have been conversations with the coaching staff throughout these runs being like, I'm gassed, like the ball needs to go elsewhere for a bit. Like players talk about that stuff. We never hear it. You just want to like hammer an advantage. I don't know if Pascal, especially the way he scores buckets, is like has 38 points before the third quarter ends or something like that, because they just like give him the ball. I'm not so sure that works, but a fun tidbit is what I'll give you, because we don't have answers to anything just yet. My friend, the one you followed, we won't divulge any names, but when they said like Porzingis is out for however many games, he messaged me and he said, advantage Celtics. So I
don't think I can go that far.
No, it's very funny though. So I'm really interested to see how Porzingis' return affects so much of this stuff, because this is like what happened with the Raptors and the Celtics. As grimy and ugly as that series got, as disappointing it was for so many people, real chess match. Everything is moving multiple times a game. And we're seeing that in Celtics and Pacers. And guys are being moved around all the time, even in like on a given possession. Like something as small as like that pre-switch that Neesmith missed out on. You can see him jump to go get it. Huge ramifications. Small things become big things in this series. And that isn't always the case. And that's something cool we get to watch. And Porzingis is a big thing that will start to affect all the small things. And I don't know. I'm excited to see it.
I think too, sometimes like the Oshae Brissett at the 5 minutes, it's somewhat ironic, perhaps a coincidence, that Oshae had one of his best career games. I don't know if this is still the case, but with the Pacers when they played the Celtics, because he caught the Daniel Tice at the 4 minutes. And at the time, Robert Williams was still playing that low man roaming role where he was assigned to low usage wings. Oshae made like 6 threes in that game, and they got more than they bargained for with him from deep against that type of coverage. The Pacers need to apply that same type of coverage. Just because an opposing team is small doesn't mean you have to hug up around the arc and guard all of them like they are knockdown shooters. And you have to choose one person that you're not going to do that against. And if I'm choosing one, it's going to be Oshae, even though he has, at least through stretches with the Pacers, shown that he can be a capable shooter. It has to be one of them if you're going to continue to stay big, and you're not going to be able to switch everything against their smaller lineup. So I think that's number one. And then, like you said, if you are going to want to play bigger, because Miles is one of your better players on the floor, then it needs to be, he has to make an impact somewhere. Like, not to repeat myself, but you don't have to just punish a switch in the post. There's other ways for you to punish a switch with your size, and that can be on the offensive glass, because that's the part that we didn't necessarily talk about. The Pacers gave up a lot of second chance opportunities in the first half, particularly on the possession that led TJ McConnell to throw his hands up in exasperation and led Rick Carlisle to call a timeout, which that's one of, you can about count on 2 reasons that Rick Carlisle will call a timeout, especially in the first half. If you've given up multiple offensive boards on the same possession, or if nobody gets back in transition. There was a lot of reasons for him to call timeouts in the first half, unfortunately, for the way that the Pacers were playing. But a lot of the offensive rebounds that the Celtics were getting were coming from their guards crashing from the perimeter. So again, it's like you were big, but you weren't playing big, and you were getting out-bigged by Boston's smaller lineup.
you and I focused in on one particular rebound that Josh Hart got when I think Andrew Nembhard met him with a very good box out, like 14 feet from the rim. And Josh just like plowed him under the bucket and corralled the rebound. Miles Turner, if Derek White is your guy, you can try something like that. And I know there's worry about like getting back in transition. I know there's all that kind of stuff, but I just these guys can give more, which makes you think like, ooh, that could be optimism or it could be pessimism, because it's like, why aren't you guys giving more? This is the Eastern Conference Finals. And maybe it's because a lot of these guys are young and they haven't been like in the league for 8 years and gone to the playoffs twice and been like, damn, this is a special moment. We have to take advantage of it. Maybe that's, more of a Pascal thing. He's like, I haven't been back here since 2019, I'm not sure. And then also to your point, my favorite thing is when non-shooters are disrespected and people have to navigate tighter spaces on the floor and they have to have more ingenuity in their two-man actions and working to create like space in the odd parts of the floor. And too often, as you said, small guys out there equals a stretched out defense when it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Yeah, I would like to see the Pacers, if that is the case, push the Celtics into like maybe a few more uncomfortable positions based on the geometry of the floor changing. You're not just small and shooting. You're small and you don't necessarily shoot the ball that well. So let's see what happens type deal.
And really the same thing can apply to Kristaps Porzingis as well.
I don't believe it. I know the stats. Right. I don't believe it. He's good. I don't believe it. I don't believe the post-ups to that degree. I don't believe the three-point shooting to that degree. I could be a hater, but I don't believe it. I need to see it.
And to your point about you understand the transition defense concern, can I show you something really quick about that? So about your point on pursuing the offensive glass and the balance of that with transition defense, what if you did both? So this was actually a possession that I saved from the blowout from the beginning of the year and that I've kept all year in case I wanted to write something about this over the summer. But if people can look at this and imagine, if everybody here for the Pacers stays on the high side of their matchup, so if you're imagining that Miles Turner actually goes to the high side of Kristaps Porzingis, TJ goes there at the free throw line to Oshae, Bruce Brown goes to Drew Holiday, Aaron Nesmith's there with Peyton Pritchard, and Buddy Hield's matched with Jaylen Brown. You're not actually pursuing the offensive rebound. You're tagging up to those players and your matchup. And if you happen to get a 50-50 ball out of the offensive rebound, then that's great. But it's more of a transition defense system. As it turns out, watch what happens in transition with the Pacers because they don't do that. You see that Miles is automatically matched with Jaylen Brown. He's beat. They're actually having to peel switch with TJ McConnell, which is certainly a mismatch for Jaylen Brown to get all the way to the basket. So again, Giles would literally tag up to Kristaps Porzingis. So you would be moving toward the basket, staying on the high side. That way, when you're running back in transition, you're automatically matched with your assignment, and this isn't happening.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any impression of that as an idea at the NBA level?
It can put you in a lot of awkward positions, and this is why the Division 6-9 Raptors were particularly good at pursuing offensive rebounds and still kind of squashing transition opportunities, is that they weren't scared of cross matches. What you just talked about is like, TJ's at the bottom. The reason why the Raptors felt pretty good was that they only had to worry about like it being Fred at the bottom, and everyone else was pretty comfortable there. This is the stamina like gamut. This is what you have to be able to do, is that there's preparation, there's scheme, there's skills, there's execution, and then there's just like working harder. Just like how Pascal shook loose after the steal in game 1 on Jaylen Brown, and he was behind Jaylen Brown, but then when Tyrese had the ball, he gave it up. He beat him down the floor for a dunk, right? Is like, can you push yourself every possession to beat guys down the floor or stay with guys, to keep your man in front of you, to pursue the ball on the offensive glass, to match up, to not let that guy beat you down the floor? Like, a lot of players don't enjoy playing that way. It's the best way to play. That's how you maximize the margins. That's how you win them. That's how the Knicks, grinded their way to a higher outcome than many people expected, especially for such an injured team. I don't know if the Pacers have it, and I don't know if they've displayed that level of, like, let's say, gumption. But yeah, I don't know. Tough.
The reason why I asked that is because very early on, you wouldn't have watched any Mad Ants games.
How dare you? I'm a
I was watching these at the beginning of the season, particularly when Jarris and Ben Shepherd were playing. And the Mad Ants were testing this as a concept. So if everybody watches, when the shot goes up, look at how all 5 Mad Ants are pursuing the glass and going to the high side of their matchups. That way you're not overrunning the matchup. You're not trying to hunt the offensive rebound. You're staying on the high side so that when you run back, you're not cross-matched and you're with everybody there. I can tell that I didn't think that they did this throughout the whole season, and I didn't get to watch every minute to really experiment what the taxes were of that. Obviously, like I said, if you do overrun it and gamble for the offensive rebound, then you've compromised the scheme. If you're on a closeout and you don't stick with the shooter and the shooter leaks out, that's going to create another issue. I just thought it was interesting and something that teams could potentially be looking at more, given how much the NBA has turned back in favor of offensive rebounding in general. The offensive rebounding rate for the league as a whole is going up. And I think for the Pacers in this matchup, because they don't necessarily have a lot of guys to be checking Boston's wings and how versatile Boston's smaller lineups can be, that it would prevent Miles from getting put in some of those types of spots. But that was just a stray thought that I had from the beginning of the year.
Good thought. That's coach brain. That's good stuff. What can we maximize? What pockets of opportunity do we find ourselves in? But I can't say yes or no because I got to see it. So that's kind of like you're the and these roles are not. This is not. This does not echo our knowledge on the game. But right now, you're the assistant coach who's like, I thought of something. I'm the head coach who's like, I got to see it. Because that's how it happens a lot of the time.
I think that's probably what most people think of anything that I read or say. Like, well, that's an idea.
No, you have
what could we do with it, though?
That's a good idea. It's just, I'm talking about.
Oh, I think I would counter and say this would be very hard for you to implement in the middle of a playoff series because this is a transition defense scheme. It's not an offensive rebounding scheme. It's a transition defense scheme more than anything, while also potentially getting you second chances. But it's kind of like some of my ideas that I've had with zone at times. I don't expect the Pacers to actually do them because you're not going to just throw something out in the middle of a playoff series that you literally never did during the regular season. But there have been several times where I wish that they had played zone during the regular season. But yeah. Anyways, do you have any closing thoughts? Because I don't really have a lot else to bring up from this game. I don't really want to harp on them more. There's already enough sad Jeff Teague lingering over this game from Tyrese's injury. So,
ladies and gentlemen, people who watch, if you'd like to commemorate this wonderful run with a t-shirt, the Agrarian Economy of Buckets t-shirt is available for sale. If you enjoy the podcast and you want to support, that's a fun way to do it. If you just want a nice white t-shirt, I walk around in this thing, fellas. You wouldn't believe the amount of women who read Basketball She Wrote, and they compliment me endlessly. You wouldn't believe the amount of men who read Basketball She Wrote, and they compliment me endlessly. You're getting it from all sides. People, they stop in the streets, they point, and they say, wow, what a great t-shirt. Yeah, if you want to commemorate, because this is like the playoff run shirt, it seems like. Maybe a little bit. That's my pitch at the end of the pod.
I do appreciate how many people have tagged us in pictures of them wearing the shirt.
Awesome.
Some people even from the West Coast. I mean, it takes a lot to convert West Coast fans into being Pacer fans and wearing Agrarian shirts, and yet this podcast has done it.
Hell yeah.
Seems a good place to end it. Hopefully happier things to talk about when the series shifts back to Indy, where the Pacers have been playing some of their best and at least better basketball at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. So looking forward to that one. Hopefully this wasn't too depressing for everybody to listen to.